Hi, and welcome to the Stock Scores Market Minutes for April 3rd, 2017. This week we're going to talk about reviewing trades, then I'll do my regular weekly market analysis, and finally the trade of the week on DFFN. Quick reminder that you can subscribe to my free weekly newsletter. It's available there at stockscores.com/newsletters.asp. Every week I send out a written commentary, a link to this video, as well as some stock trading ideas. All right, let's get into this concept of reviewing trades. Every day the market teaches you a lesson, and so many people fail to take that lesson as an education. We need to track our winners and our losers and look for patterns that predict success or failure. This is something that I do every day, but certainly if you're not a day trader, then you would do it perhaps weekly if you're a swing trader, or monthly if you are a longer term trader. What's important is that we analyze large sample sizes. Take a large sampling of your trades, compare characteristics of the winners with characteristics of the losers, and look for patterns that help you predict when the winners will win and when the losers will lose. But again, remember to use large sample sizes. Don't make judgments based on a small number of trades. It has to be gathering a lot of data and then tweaking that criteria to see how those tweaks affect the overall profitability. As long as your sample size is large, the numbers don't lie. Here's an example that I did from last week. I went through all of the day trades from March 27th to 31st. There were 39, of which 25 were winners. The net gain was 26.9 reward for risk. Now, what does that mean? It means if I risked $100, I made $26.90. If I risked $1,000, I made $26,900. The biggest winner of the week was DFFN, which will be our trade of the week. We'll discuss that at the end of the video. And then there were 4 stocks that were stopped out. I have my stops at a -3 RR. What you see here is the equity curve for the week. So Monday was a very quiet day. Tuesday was a good day. Wednesday was a good day. Thursday, okay. And then Friday was kind of a quiet day, as Fridays often are, particularly at the end of the month. All right, let's get into this week's analysis. Here is a chart of the S&P 500 SPY 30-day 60-minute chart. You can see that we were in a nice upward trend. We broke the upward trend. We kind of rolled over with a little bit of a pullback. We broke that pullback here, and we've been rising, but the longer term pullback line, which is more like this, we are still below. So I don't think the pullback is necessarily over. We would need to break that downward trend line there and get up through, sort of the 238 level on the SPY. So one concern I have is that at the end of Friday's session, we had a little bit of a rollover there, which sort of maybe leads us to think that we could see this move lower again. So we've got to watch real closely next week. Do we break this line or do we roll over lower? And of course, that will telegraph the move likely for the week. Here's a chart of the S&P 500 on a weekly time frame. You can see this past week we closed above the open. That's a positive, and we've held the long-term upward trend line, but we are still quite a distance above that. So we could still have fairly significant sell-off to take us back to that upward trend line and really not break the upward trend line. The main problem for the market was that it rallied up to the top of its channel right there, and it got stuck, rolled over, and now we're correcting back. Once we get down to the bottom of the channel, somewhere in this range, then the buyer should step in again and perpetuate that long-term upward trend. So short term, maybe some uncertainty. Longer term, the trend is still bullish. Moving along to the Russell 2000, the daily chart, and really we had a little bit of a bounce back this week, but we're still in pullback mode. Not the same sort of pullback that we had in the S&P, because this market has not made the same sort of gains. It has been a market led by the large caps, and the small caps have really lagged the overall market. And until we start to see breaks to new highs, we should continue to sort of shy away from the small caps. Now, the Toronto Stock Exchange was also in pullback mode, but it broke its pullback this week, and that sort of puts it in a little more favorable position. We're more of a neutral chart here in the short term. But again, at the end of the day, Friday, I have worried a little bit about this breakdown here. We could be testing this and maybe taking another leg down. So we got some conflicting signals. I would rate this neutral to negative. We'll see how things pan out next week. But again, on the longer term chart on the SPY, the XIU, you can see that we're still in that upward sloping channel. We really got close to breaking the bottom of the channel there. We've talked about that the last week as well. And right now it's trying to bounce off of that upward sloping channel, and does it do so? Or does it break down through it? If it breaks down through it, if we have a bad week where we close significantly below that trend line, then we're probably headed for here and then here, the near-term support areas on the weekly chart. The TSX Venture is very much like a gold chart because, of course, there are many gold mining stocks on this market. You can see that we have some resistance there. We're building rising bottoms, but in the big picture, we are still in sort of a downward trend there. So what we need to see is a break up through 850. That would be bullish for the TSX Venture. If we break down through these lows, which were from late last year, then we're probably headed lower again. And a lot of that is going to depend on what happens with gold, which we'll touch on in a moment. U.S. Treasuries really stuck in a sideways trading range there. And until we see a break up through resistance or down through support, I wouldn't get too optimistic or pessimistic one way or the other. We're really just in a sideways range for the Treasury market. And of course, the bond market being a indication of where interest rates are likely to go. Now, the US dollar has been selling off for the last few months, but it made a kind of an important move this week because it started with weakness and ended up closing at the highs for the week. And that's something called a bullish engulfing candle. And that is a sign that maybe the bulls are coming back to the US dollar. Now, if we were to draw a line across here, you would see that we just basically touched that line. Now what we have to watch for is, do we break out of the pennant or do we break down through that bottom line? My inclination, because the trend was up coming into this, is that we will break to the upside here in the next couple of weeks. But there's also a 30% chance we break down and the US dollar falls lower into this range. Again, I would say 70% chance we get the breakout to the upside and the US dollar continues to strengthen. Moving on to gold, we've got that important gold chart here. Breaking the downward trend line has not yet happened. We've risen up to it. This is the weekly chart. We'll see if it can ultimately break out through that downward trend line. It hasn't happened yet, but that's something we want to keep an eye out for. Here we have the oil chart. Been in a sideways range for well over a year, and we're still stuck in that range. We've fallen down to the bottom of the range. And when you look at the weekly chart, even though the selling pressure of the last few weeks seems like it's a big deal, in the context of this longer term weekly chart, we're really still just stuck in a sideways range that you could take all the way back in here. So we have stability in oil. We just don't have any real motivation by the buyers or sellers. Ultimately, until we can break out or break down, I don't expect a trend. We're just going to grind our way sideways. Near term, I do think we could see a little bit of a rise, as it does appear like the oil market is bouncing off of support. And finally, the VIX chart. This is our fear index. We had that little jump in fear, but it hadn't broken the downward trend. And again, we're just, anytime there's strength in fear, strength in the VIX, it tends to peter out, and that's what's happened again. Maybe we get another little jump here, we'll see. But until we get a real strong move on the VIX, I would not consider this much more than a very short-term trading vehicle. All right then, so US stocks, bullish long-term, bearish short-term. Canadian stocks a little better in the short term. I've got them at a neutral rating, slightly negative. Gold, bearish long-term, neutral short-term, right at that downward trend line that it needs to break. Oil, neutral long-term, bearish short-term. We could probably up that to neutral as it's very close to wanting to bounce. U.S. stocks made a comeback from oversold this week, but have not broken their pullback. Canadian stocks have broken the pullback, keeping the long-term uptrend intact. Gold is stuck at the downward trend line of resistance. Oil bouncing from oversold, but still has work to do. And fear is back to low levels yet again. All right, this is the trade of the week. This was a day trade using my intraday pullbacks strategy. It gets on the list because it made what I call an action candle. That is an indicator I have created for TradeStation. And then I monitor those stocks that make those intraday pullback action candle signals for another signal using something called a message candle. And we had one of those right there. All of these things taught in my active trader course. And I'll be running a course again, probably in May, if you want to learn how all this stuff works. But there you can see the risk reward lines plotted. This stock ended up closing the day a little better than 10 RR. And that's a great move into the close, especially. All started by the abnormal activity that you see with that abnormal spike in volume to start the day. And then we had that nice rally into the close for a 10-to-1 reward for risk trade. Leave your comments in the subject area or in the comments area below. Subscribe to the channel, tell your friends, and like this video if you thought it was great. Thanks, and have a great week in the market. Trade well.